the Darwin Awards recognize individuals who have removed themselves from the gene pool in ways that are often questioned and used as an example of what not to do. These often begin with acts of breathtaking overconfidence or mind-numbing misjudgment that lead to tragic missteps and tragic outcomes. But before today's video, I want to talk about this video's sponsor, Aura. One part of the TikTok ban that could become problematic not only for myself, but for you as well, is the fact that any person online could go to a data broker's website right now and buy anyone's data for just a few bucks. It's completely legal and could happen to anyone, including you. Big companies with poor security are getting hacked every day, and your personal information is being sold on the dark web, so spammers, scammers, and identity thieves can target you, and they face zero repercussions from it. Have you ever been a victim of a data breach? If not, does it ever worry you that this exact problem could happen to you? The best way to fully protect yourself and your online data safe from data brokers and hackers is to use Aura. Within a few weeks of using Aura, you'll no longer see your information on data broker sites by identifying and submitting opt-out requests on your behalf, saving you time and will lead to less spam. Aura will keep monitoring the dark web and alert you if any personal information has been exposed. So if you're trying to keep your digital property, such as your credit or bank account, protected, Aura will keep your online presence safe for you. Plus, they will give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance that should the worst case scenario happen, you have no worries. The Aura app also has a VPN with 100+ virtual locations. Personally, I haven't found a VPN that provides these same benefits alongside identity theft protection. You can go to my link, aura.com/darknature, to try 14 days for free to try out Aura for yourself. It's Saturday morning, April 8th of 2000. The Arctic Man event is in full swing in the Hoodoo Mountains of Alaska. The high-stakes snowmobile competition draws racers from around the world, all pushing their limits in adrenaline-fueled showdowns on the ice. Thousands of spectators gather each year to witness the action, soaking in the electrifying atmosphere. For the attendees, it's not just about watching. The event offers designated camping grounds and separate snowmobile tracks where visitors can stay for a few days, get a taste of the sport firsthand, and enjoy the professional races up close. That morning, among the crowd was 43-year-old Walter J. Cody from Fairbanks. After watching the races for a while, he decided to hit the track himself. He fired up his snowmobile and started tearing up and down the slopes, carving through the crisp morning air. The thrill was there, but after a while, regular racing wasn't cutting it anymore. He wanted something more. Something that would really test his skills. That's when it hit him. The terrain was perfect for Hainbaching. Hainbaching is one of the most extreme snowmobile stunts out there. That's when riders push their machines as high as possible up steep mountain slopes, relying purely on momentum. The real challenge comes when gravity kicks in. Just before losing all speed, the rider has to launch into a tight aerial turn, flipping the snowmobile around mid-air to face back down the slope before rocketing downward. Needless to say, the dangers are real. Tipping backward and getting crushed under the machine, botching the mid-air turn, or worse, triggering an avalanche, are all possibilities. The intense speed and force of a high-marking attempt can destabilize entire snowpacks, making the risk not just personal but potentially catastrophic. That's because the best slopes for high marking are also the ones most prone to avalanches. While attempting his stunt again and again, Walter realized his elevation was improving. His control was getting better, and every time he climbed higher than before, the thrill skyrocketed. It was perhaps far more exhilarating than just simply watching a race. Walter kept pushing himself, repeating the stunt over and over, until one run changed everything. His snowmobile tore through a weak layer of ice, and before he could react, the whole thing collapsed. Massive slabs of ice broke loose, rolling into a full-blown avalanche, barreling straight towards him. Walter couldn't outrun the debris. Just a few minutes later, the wave of snow caught him, slamming both him and his snowmobile into the ground. For a second, everything went black. It felt like he was gone. But then he jolted back to consciousness and realized he was buried up to his waist, but miraculously, his head was still above the surface. With help from bystanders, he managed to claw his way out. This very easily could have been fatal. If the snow had swallowed him whole, or if he'd been badly injured, that would have been it. While that wasn't the case, it should have been a wake-up call at the very least. But for Walter, it wasn't either. He took some time to shake off the trauma and made his way back to the base of the slope, and that's when he made another reckless decision. If he had survived that, maybe luck was on his side. Maybe it meant he could go again. Before he could take off, Alaska state troopers pulled up. They'd heard about the crash and they came to check if he was alright. Walter assured them he was fine, but they weren't just concerned about his condition, they saw what he was about to do. They warned him the ice was dangerously unstable, even worse now with the fresh snowfall. If he tried the stunt again, he might not get another lucky break. But Walter shrugged it off. Seeing he wasn't convinced, one of the troopers gave him a last piece of advice. If he was going to do this, at least take an avalanche beacon. These devices emit a signal so rescuers can locate someone buried under the snow, but Walter ignored that too. He jumped back on his snowmobile and raced up the slope, determined to continue his feat. After a few more attempts, he found himself in the exact same situation. While carving his way up and down the mountain, he disturbed another slab of ice, this time an even bigger one. A massive avalanche broke loose and came roaring down, swallowing him whole. No one was around to help him this time. Walter was buried completely under the snow, with no chance of escape. He died under the crushing weight of the ice at around midday, and later in the evening when he was reported missing, a rescue team was sent out with search dogs. The next morning around 8:30 a.m., they found the debris field, and underneath it laid his frozen, lifeless body, suffering the outcome of a fatal choice. Parkour training or free running is easily one of the riskiest adventure activities out there. It's not just a sport, it's a discipline where walls, railings, and rooftops turn into an endless obstacle course, pushing a runner's physical and mental limits, demanding split-second decisions, and requiring complete control over their own body. Like any other extreme sport, it's all about pushing boundaries, vaulting over fences, scaling buildings, and landing with the right kind of precision that makes the impossible look effortless. There are no set of rules, no referees, and this is where it gets chilling. There are no safety nets either. Practitioners known as dresseurs train their bodies to absorb impact, read terrain while acrobating, and react instinctively. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, maybe a mistimed jump or a weak grip, and that's all it takes. A mistake could mean a brutal fall, which is why conditioning is just as crucial as technique. Every movement, whether it's a precision jump, a cat grab, or a Kong vault, is drilled over and over again until instinct takes over. Still, every year, around 5 people lose their lives attempting parkour, while countless others suffer injuries ranging from mild falls to devastating accidents that can leave them crippled for life. The risk is high for anyone. For beginners, it's even worse. But if you're reckless, or worse if you're drunk, that's when an attempt at parkour isn't just dangerous, it's fatal. That's what turned out to be the fate of an English teenager, Mark, back in 2002. He and his friends were hanging out on the streets of Maidenhead, Berkshire, just killing time, chatting, and messing around, when someone pointed out a massive gap between 2 multi-story parking garages. Below it was a brutal 40-foot drop straight onto solid concrete. No way anyone could take that fall and walk away in one piece. The group started talking about it, throwing around comments, until the topic of parkour slipped into the conversation. Mark had recently gotten into it. He was still learning the ropes, practicing different moves, but he had a solid grasp of landing, absorbing impact, and controlling his body. His friends, caught up in the moment, threw out a wild suggestion. Why not put those skills to the test and jump the gap? Mark didn't even hesitate. The energy in the air, the hype from his friends, it all built up until the idea didn't seem that crazy anymore. He actually started considering it. Stepping up to the edge, he looked down. The air felt heavier there. The ground seemed impossibly far, but the other side, just a few steps and a leap away, felt within reach. He took another step back, then another, until he had the perfect distance for a solid run-up. One last glance at the other side, a deep breath, and he ran. The first few strides were a blur. His friends were cheering, shouting, and before he knew it, he was at the edge. Mark launched himself off. For a split second, he was weightless. Then panic set in, but in the next instant, his feet hit the ledge, and his body rolled into a perfect landing. Time snapped back into focus. He turned to see his friends losing their minds, cheering like crazy, and he had actually done it. The group rushed over, buzzing with adrenaline. Mark had just pulled off something insane, and there was only one thing left to do: to celebrate. They went straight to a bar, still riding the rush of what just happened. Drinks flowed, and the conversation kept circling back to the jump. Each time they talked about it, the gap stretched wider and wider. The fall felt deadlier, and Mark's landing seemed even smoother. They cracked jokes, messed around, and for a while the night felt like it would never end. But eventually it was time to go. Stumbling out into the cool night air, they made their way through town, still laughing, still talking, until they ended up right back where it all started, the parking lot. It felt different now. It was quieter, the streets were empty, the distant hum of traffic was the only thing cutting through the silence. And then one of Mark's friends suggested he should do it again. Mark chuckled at first, brushing it off, but the idea kept coming back, and once again, with each repetition, it started sounding less like a joke. His buzzed mind latched onto it, and deep down, he wanted to feel that moment again. He turned his eyes, locked onto the gap, and in the dim light, it looked even wider than before. He stepped forward, toes hovering over the edge. The drop below was nothing but blackness. A slow inhale, and he backed up for the run-up. The alcohol made his movements looser, but his body still remembered what to do. A quick glance at his friends, who were waiting and watching, and one last deep breath, and then he ran, launching himself off the pavement once again. The air rushed past his face, his arms tucked in instinctively, his legs stretched just right, the gap disappeared beneath him. The pavement on the other side rushed towards him exactly where it should be, and he almost had it. But then his feet made contact and he realized something was off. The weight felt too much on his heels and not enough forward push. His legs weren't absorbing the impact and they were collapsing under him. The first jump had been instinct, clean, and controlled. This one was rushed, fueled by his intoxicated overconfidence. His body tilted back and his arms flailed out, searching for balance, but the momentum had already turned against him. His foot slipped and suddenly he was falling with no time to react. His friends froze in horror as their screams pierced the air as they watched him plunge into the dark gap below. Mark was rushed to the hospital, but no amount of medical intervention could change what had already been done. He was gone on the spot. Electrofishing is a technique that uses electrical currents to temporarily stun fish, making them easier to catch. It works by sending a controlled electric field into the water, which disrupts the fish's nervous system and triggers a reflex called galvanotaxis, causing them to involuntarily swim towards the source of the current. The method is commonly used in scientific research and conservation as a non-lethal way to study fish populations. It helps researchers assess species diversity, monitor fish health, and track environmental changes in aquatic ecosystems. To keep the fish safe, scientists carefully fine-tune the voltage and pulse frequency, ensuring the targeted individual recovers from the shock quickly before being released back into the water. However, over the years, electrofishing has also become a tool for poachers who use it as an illegal fishing method. Unlike its controlled implementation, poachers often rely on crude, homemade electrical devices that indiscriminately stun or kill large numbers of fish on the spot. This doesn't just wipe out entire populations, including juveniles and non-target species, but also throws the whole aquatic ecosystem into chaos, killing off amphibians and anything else unlucky enough to have been in the water. More importantly, it's not always just the aquatic life that ends up in danger. It was a humid afternoon on February 6th of 2023 in a rural Cambodian village. 24-year-old local boy Sen Pak stood at the edge of a pond near his village with a fishing net slung over his shoulder. The murky water was restless with ripples breaking the surface every few moments, which was a clear sign that fish were swarming beneath. It should have been good news, but Sen wasn't exactly thrilled. He knew that catching a decent haul with just a net could take days, and with the pond this full, it was only a matter of time before other villagers noticed and joined in. He didn't want to have to share. He wanted all of it, right then and right there. That's when an idea struck him, one he'd seen used by commercial fishermen, electrofishing, and he knew a single surge could kill everything in an instant, making the entire catch his for the taking. But there was a problem. Unlike the professionals, Sen had no specialized equipment, no protective gear, just the idea and the reckless confidence to pull it off. His eyes landed on a power pole nearby with its wires hanging low. That was all he needed. Without a second thought, he climbed the pole and ripped 2 thick electrical wires free. Sparks crackled as they whipped through the air, but he barely flinched. To him, this was just a necessary step toward an easy payday. With his bare hands, he carefully picked up the tangled wires and crouched near the water's surface. He plunged the live wires straight into the water. For a second, nothing happened. But then the reaction exploded to life. The pond shuddered as invisible currents of electricity snaked through the water, surging outwards in all directions. The surface trembled, and fish thrashed violently, and within seconds, dozens of them flipped belly up, their bodies twitching before going completely still. Moments later, it was over. The once lively pond had turned into a floating graveyard, with its surface littered with dozens of lifeless fish. Sen watched in awe. It had worked, and better than he had ever imagined. His excitement overpowered any sense of caution because he had just secured several days' worth of fish in just a few moments. He rushed forward to collect the reward, but in his haste, he forgot one crucial thing. He hadn't disconnected the wires. The moment his foot touched the water, everything changed. The jolt hit him like a sledgehammer. Every muscle in his body locked up at once, his vision erupting in white-hot flashes as his breath caught in his throat. He tried to move, he tried to scream, but his body was no longer his to control. He collapsed instantly, hitting the water with a dull splash. The pond went still again, and Sen Pak now floated among the victims he had slaughtered. The villagers found him sometime later, drawn by the creepy stillness of the pond. At first they saw only the dead fish, and then their eyes landed on Sen's lifeless body. Panicked, they scrambled to pull him from the water, dragging him onto the muddy bank. Desperate to save him, they resorted to a local folk remedy by burying him under a mound of sand, believing it might somehow draw the electricity from his body and bring him back. When that failed, they rushed him to get medical help, but by the time they reached the hospital, it was too late. Hainbach was not only a victim of electrocution, but also of his own miscalculation, and more than anything else, a fatal impatience.